Read it. 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 Wrote it. Read it.
Do you have a favorite person from American history, like, George Washington or Thomas Jefferson? Maybe George Washington Carver or Susan B. Anthony. Well, my favorite person is Benjamin Franklin. He was an inventor, a scientist, a writer, and an American ambassador. He invented bifocal glasses, a stove, and a lightning rod. He also started one of the first fire departments. He loved books, so he started a library. He even started a hospital. He was an all-around person. And one of my favorite books about Benjamin Franklin is this one, Ben and Me by Robert Lawson. Now, to read this book, you have to pretend that Ben had a pet mouse named Amos, because Amos is the one who tells the story in this book. And according to Amos, Ben didn't invent those things. Amos did. Oh, Ben would work on things, but Amos was always there to show him how to get them right. Most of the time, Amos was pretty crabby, and especially crabby when Ben did something to annoy him, like the experiment with electricity. Now, back in those days, there was no such thing as electrical power, but Ben knew there was something in a thunderstorm, something in the lightning that was terribly powerful. He actually rigged his house so that the next time a storm struck, the lightning would come inside.
After the electrical exhibition, most of Ben's acquaintances regarded him rather suspiciously. The governor even crossed to the opposite side of the street when we approached. Well, Ben never noticed us being wrapped up in more experiments. I observed that he was developing an unseemly interest in lightning. Well, every time a house or a tree was struck, Ben was the first to reach the scene, questioning all who had been present as to how the bolt had looked, smelled, or sounded, what sensations they had felt, and so on. Then he would go into a brown study that lasted for hours, occasionally murmuring, I wonder. Wonder what? I asked finally. It was getting on my nerves. Wondering if lightning and electricity are the same thing. Well, to me they are, I said promptly. They're both annoying, horrid, dangerous nuisances that should be let strictly alone. There you go again, Amos. No vision. No vision. All right. And if they are the same, and you do prove it, then what? Why then I shall go down in history as he who tamed the lightning. If you have any notion of making a house pet of this lightning, you can go down in history as anything you please. For myself, I will go down in the cellar and stay there. Well, 2 days later, I was awakened from my afternoon nap by a terrible clatter overhead. Investigation disclosed Ben seated on the roof, busily hammering. He had fastened a whole collection of sharp-pointed iron rods to various parts of the housetop. There were 2 or 3 on each chimney and a series of them along the ridgepole. These were all connected by a tangle of wires and rods that ran down through the trapdoor into our room. Now, you see, Amos, the trouble with most people is that they lack the calm observation of the trained scientific mind. Now, time after time, I've rushed to the scene of one of these lightning strokes, and all I could gather from the bystanders was that they were terrible scared. Now, by collecting a small amount of this so-called lightning with the rods, which you saw on the roof, and conducting it through wires to these jars and instruments, we shall be able to investigate its nature and behavior with true scientific calm. We shall be able to settle forever the question which is puzzling all great minds, the question of whether or not lightning is electrical. It has never puzzled my mind, I said. Left to myself, I wouldn't give it a thought. Moreover, you might as well leave out that we. I resigned from these experiments a long time ago. Any observing that I will do will be done in the cellar. And as the sky has clouded up rather threateningly, I think I will retire there at once. Well, the storm must have been closer than I thought, for I had barely started for the door when there occurred a most horrifying flash of lightning. followed by a thunderclap that shook the house to its foundations. The shock threw me bodily into a large glass jar, luckily empty. Well, this was really fortunate, for here I was able to observe all that went on, while the glass seemed to protect me from the lightning flashes that now followed one another in rapid succession. At the first flash, the liquid in Ben's jars disappeared in a great burst of yellowish steam, and the instruments bounced about wildly. As flash followed flash, blue sparks ran up and down the wires, and the brass andirons glowed as though dipped in phosphorus, and streaks of fire shot from the candlesticks on the mantelpiece. The crashing thunder was, of course, continuous, jarring every loose object in the house. There was now no doubt in my mind that lightning was electricity in its most horrid and dangerous form. In the confusion, I had forgotten Ben. Now, looking about, I was astonished to find him nowhere in sight. At this moment, a large ball of blue fire emerged from the Franklin stove, rolled across the floor, descended the stairs, crackling and giving off a strange odor of sulfur. The unusually violent crash that followed brought a faint moan from the bed. Well, there I discovered Ben, or rather his feet, for they were the only part of him visible. The rest was covered by the bedclothes, while 2 pillows completely muffled his head. At first I was alarmed, but as each succeeding crash brought an echoing moan and a violent trembling of feet, I realized that all had befallen him was a severe case of fright. Well, safe in my glass jar, I thoroughly enjoyed the spectacle of Ben's terror as long as the storm raged. As the last rumblings died away, he cautiously raised the pillows and peered forth. He was a most amusing sight. "And now, Dr. Franklin, would you lend a bit of your calm scientific study to getting me out of this jar? And by the way, what did you observe as to the true nature of lightning?" "Do you know, Amos, that the first flash knocked off my glasses? And of course, I see very poorly without them." "So you replaced them with a couple of pillows?" He never answered me. He just started picking up the remains of his apparatus. But when some time later a scientific writer called them lightning rods, naming Ben as their inventor, he refused to take the credit. Well, this startling display of modesty surprised many people, but not me. I knew all about it.
Well, that should have proved to Ben that lightning was electrical, but it didn't. He wanted stronger evidence. That's when he did something he shouldn't have done. He tricked Amos into another experiment. Well, you know how to fly a kite. Well, back in those days, flying kites was very popular, and Ben loved his kite. He loved to fly it on good days with good weather. But this time when he flew his kite, he was actually hoping for bad weather.
After the disastrous lightning rod experiment, Ben was quite subdued for some days and never even mentioned electricity. I had hoped that he was cured of this dangerous hobby, but alas, my hope was soon to be rudely shattered. This question of the nature of lightning so preyed upon his mind that he was finally driven to an act of deceit that caused the first and only rift in our long friendship. I feel sure that this brooding on the subject must have seriously affected his mind, for this is the only way in which I can excuse his treacherous conduct. It came about in this fashion. Now, one of Ben's favorite forms of relaxation was kite flying. On his largest kite, he had built for me a tiny platform. Made of light splinters of wood, this was securely lashed to the kite, just where the sticks of the frame crossed. A stout railing surrounded it, and the floor was cushioned with milkweed down, so that a safer or more snug retreat could be scarce imagined. Sailing aloft in this was a delightful sensation. The gentle motions of the kite, the warmth of the sun, and the broad view spread out below all combined to make it a thoroughly restful and enjoyable experience. A new thrill was added when we contrived a tiny car slung to a pulley running on the kite string. In this, I could cast off from my little porch and go coasting in a long, glorious swoop to Ben in the earth far below. To this car, we later added a small sail, so that when the wind was sufficiently strong, I could sail up the string to the kite. Enabled thus to ascend and descend at will, I spent many happy hours at this thrilling sport. That deceit could raise its ugly head in such idyllic surroundings and bring to an end these innocent diversions seems particularly painful. I shall pass over as rapidly as possible the unfortunate happenings which almost brought our friendship to a close. Ben had hinted that if I were willing to stay aloft during a thunderstorm, I could, being so close to the clouds, very easily determine the nature of lightning. My reply to this proposal was prompt, decided, and in the negative, very strongly in the negative. So much so that Ben dropped the subject and had, I had thought, given up the idea completely. But alas for my trust in human honor. Little did I dream of the horrid plot that this electrical mania was causing to form in his disordered brain. One hot July afternoon, I had ridden aloft and, lulled by the gentle motion and the sun's warmth, had indulged in a long nap. From this, I was awakened by a violent tossing of the kite. I had once realized from the black and threatening clouds that a sudden thunderstorm was rapidly approaching, its preliminary gusts already tossing the kite wildly about. While hastily preparing to descend in my little car, I was horrified to discover that it was not there. Jerks on the string to signal Ben brought no response. The ugly details of his plot began to dawn on me. I recalled his haste to launch the kite and his incessant talk while doing so, all designed to hide the fact that he had removed the car. With or without my consent, he had resolved to keep me aloft during the storm. Well, I sought wildly for some method of descending the string, but the wind by now was so strong that all my efforts were required to cling to the frail platform. The next half hour was the most awful experience of my life. The wild plunging of the kite, the driving sheets of rain, the incessant lightning flashes, and the crashing thunder all were so terrifying, I could only hang on and pray. As shock after stiffening shock ran through my body, there was no further doubt in my mind as to the nature of lightning. It was electrical, decidedly so. Blue sparks crackled from my whiskers. Every hair stood on end, and my frame was convulsed by the never-ending shocks. After what seemed hours of this torture, the storm passed, and I knew by the motions of the string that the kite was being lowered. Nearing the earth, I saw that Ben had taken cover in a shed and was regarding my approach with the greatest eagerness. Before I had reached the ground, he was calling, "Was it, Amos? Was it electricity? Was it?"
Well, life with Ben Franklin was often dangerous, but it was never dull. And Amos found out that experimenting with electricity was tame compared to what he got into when he went with Ben to France. But I'll let you read that for yourself. Go to the library and look for Ben and Me by Robert Lawson.